The bow trembled in Janet Brooks's hand as she stood alone on the empty stage, facing the ghost of her own silence. The spotlight burned on her skin, but the echo she waited for never came. Half of the notes dissolved before reaching her ears, swallowed by the emptiness inside her. Her fingers knew the melody, yet her soul couldn't follow it anymore. What once was music had become a memory of vibration and loss. When the curtain closed, Janet sat in the dark, listening to the faint hum of the lights above her. The crowd had left long ago, leaving only the sound of her own breathing. The faint tinnitus that followed the accident played like a cruel metronome. She pressed her palms over her ears, but silence pressed back even harder. There was no applause now, only regret. She lived in a small house on the outskirts of a Texas town that barely remembered her name. Her violin rested in a dusty case by the window, untouched for years. The wind outside howled across the fields, slipping through the cracks of her home like whispers of a forgotten concert. Each gust carried memories she wished she could forget. Every night, the wind played a song she could no longer hear. Janet had stopped teaching, performing, even listening to music. The world felt quieter, not in peace, but in defeat. She moved through her days as if walking through water, each sound heavy and distorted. The silence wasn't empty, it was sharp, cutting through her heart. Every vibration she felt in the floorboards reminded her of what she had lost. Then, one afternoon, something changed. While sitting on her porch with a cup of coffee, she caught the faintest melody drifting from the town square. It was off-key, clumsy, uncertain, but alive. Her heart jumped, unsure if it was real or just another echo of memory. She set the cup down, stood up, and listened harder. The tune wavered again, fragile but insistent. Someone was trying to make music out there, and somehow, it reached her through the wind. Janet's chest tightened as curiosity wrestled with pain. She hadn't followed a sound in years. Yet something inside whispered that this one was different. Something in that imperfection called her name. She grabbed her coat, stepped down from the porch, and walked toward the sound. The late sun stretched her shadow long across the road. Each step felt like trespassing into a forgotten part of her own soul. And as the wind shifted, the melody grew clearer, pulling her closer to the square end, to a story she never knew was waiting. The town square buzzed softly with the sound of mismatched instruments. A group of children sat on folding chairs, scraping and plucking their way through a tune that barely held together. Janet stopped behind a tree, half hidden, watching. Their teacher, a young man with kind eyes, was trying to lead them, but chaos ruled the song. Still, there was something heartbreakingly beautiful in their effort. A boy at the front, no older than 12, struggled with his violin. His bows screeched across the strings, and he frowned with fierce concentration. Janet found herself smiling despite the noise. It reminded her of her own first lessons, messy, loud, and full of hope. The boy looked up suddenly, catching her gaze across the square. His face lit up like recognition. He whispered to a friend, then walked straight toward her. "Ma'am, you used to play, didn't you?" he asked, holding out the violin awkwardly. "Can you help me tune this? It sounds wrong." Janet froze, caught between the instinct to run and the ache to say yes. She hadn't touched a violin in 5 years, yet the request felt like a hand reaching through time. She took the instrument, feeling the wood's warmth against her palm. Her fingers automatically found the pegs, adjusting them one by one. The strings moaned, sharp then soft, until a note finally rang clear enough to make her chest tighten. "Better," she whispered, though she barely heard it herself. The boy grinned. "Thanks. What's your name?" She hesitated before answering. "Janet." The young teacher approached, smiling with recognition. "With Janet Brooks, the violinist?" She laughed awkwardly, trying to dismiss it, but the children's faces had already lit with awe. "I haven't been that in a long time," she murmured. Still, something about the warmth of their excitement eased the cold inside her. The boy begged, "Can you show me how to play one note right?" Her pulse quickened. She hadn't performed for anyone since the accident. Her hand trembled as she lifted the bow and set it against the string. One gentle stroke, and a fractured note escaped, broken, uneven, but real. The children clapped anyway, delighted. Janet smiled for a second, then felt the dizziness of fear rush back. The sound wasn't what it used to be. She handed the violin back quickly and mumbled an excuse. "I should go." As she turned away, the laughter of the children followed her through the square. The melody resumed, still off-key, still alive. Janet walked home with her heart pounding, torn between shame and something that felt dangerously close to hope. At home, the silence felt heavier than ever. Janet sat at her kitchen table, staring at her old violin case across the room. The memory of that fractured note in the square replayed endlessly in her mind. Her ears ached with the ghost of sound, that half-heard tone vibrating somewhere deep inside her. She hated how much she wanted to hear it again. Finally, she stood and crossed the room. Dust rose as she unlatched the case, the hinges creaking like an old sigh. The violin inside was worn but still beautiful, the varnish dulled by time. She ran her fingers along its body, remembering every concert hall, every ovation. Her reflection in the wood was older, sadder, but not yet finished. She lifted it slowly to her shoulder. The bow met the strings, and the first sound that came out was painfully uneven. She stopped, adjusted, tried again. Each attempt felt like learning to walk on broken legs. Some notes disappeared entirely, lost in the gap between her ears and her memory. But one stubborn note clung to the air, trembling like a survivor. She closed her eyes, letting it linger as long as it could. When it faded, the house seemed even quieter. She could feel the silence watching her, testing her courage. Anger flared, not at the sound but at herself for surrendering for so long. "You're not done," she whispered aloud, surprised by her own voice. The words echoed faintly, fragile yet true. Somewhere inside, a door creaked open. That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind rattled her windows, mimicking the hum of strings. It wasn't a melody, just random notes carried by nature's breath. But to her, it sounded almost like a message. She sat up, listening, her hand resting on the violin case beside the bed. For the first time in years, she didn't fear the sound of the wind. She listened to it as if it were a friend. When morning came, the decision had already formed. She would go back to the square, not to perform, not to teach us to listen. Something about those children's raw, imperfect sound had reminded her of the joy she'd forgotten. Maybe the wind wasn't mocking her after all. Maybe it was calling her back. When Janet returned to the square, the children were already gathered, their instruments squeaking through scales. Eli spotted her and waved excitedly, nearly dropping his bow. "You came back," he shouted. She smiled shyly, nodding. The young teacher, Mr. Reyes, greeted her warmly and asked if she'd like to help. "Only for a bit," she said, though her heart knew she was staying longer. She knelt beside Eli, showing him how to hold the violin properly. Her hands guided his, steady but gentle. The moment the bow touched the string correctly, a clean note filled the air, thin but pure. Eli's grin stretched wide, and the other kids gathered around, eager to learn. Janet felt something flutter inside her chest, a small spark where darkness had lived too long. Each afternoon after that, she returned. The lessons grew into laughter, rhythm, and new friendships. She taught them not only notes but patience, how music was more about listening than playing. The children adored her stories from her days on tour, though she skipped the parts about fame and loss. For them, she was just Miss Janet, the lady who made sound feel like magic. The square began to change. People started stopping by to watch the lessons, bringing snacks and folding chairs. The old oak tree became their shelter, its branches swaying like a natural metronome. When they played together, the imperfections blended into something strangely beautiful. Janet could almost feel her heart tuning itself back to life. One afternoon, Eli asked the question she feared most. "Why did you stop playing?" The bow in her hand stilled. She smiled faintly, eyes on the horizon. "Sometimes life gets louder than music," she said softly. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The children nodded as if they understood, and she was grateful they didn't ask more. As the sun set, she packed up the instruments and looked at the faces around her. Something about their faith in her made her want to deserve it. For the first time in years, she didn't dread tomorrow. She waved goodbye, the wind tugging gently at her hair, and started walking home. Behind her, Eli's voice carried through the air. "See you tomorrow, Miss Janet." She smiled and whispered to herself, "Yes, tomorrow." But deep down, she knew tomorrow wouldn't be the same as today. Something inside her had shifted, like a door creaking open to let the music back in, and for the first time since the accident, she wanted to walk through it. That night, Janet sat at her kitchen table again, the violin resting in her lap. The soft hum of crickets outside mixed with the low sigh of the wind. She drew a slow breath and began to play, not for an audience, not for perfection, but for herself. The notes stumbled, cracked, and fell apart, but she didn't stop. Every imperfect sound was a rebellion against silence. Halfway through the melody, she closed her eyes, the vibrations under her chin, the faint rhythm in her chest. She could feel the song, even when she couldn't hear it. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they weren't from pain this time. They were from relief. The silence was no longer her enemy. It had become part of the music. Over the next week, the children grew bolder, their practice sessions louder. Janet taught them to listen to one another, to trust the pauses between the notes. The square filled with laughter, with rhythm, with life, and with every session, she rediscovered fragments of herself she thought were gone. The woman who once feared the quiet was learning to live inside it. Then one morning, a letter arrived at her doorstep, sealed with gold ink. The envelope bore the logo of the town's summer festival. Her hands trembled as she read, "We'd like the community ensemble to perform this year. Please confirm. Participation Director Janet Brooks." Her heart raced. She hadn't stood on a stage since the night of the accident. Could she face it again? At rehearsal that afternoon, she shared the news. The children erupted in cheers, spinning their bows in the air. Janet smiled, though fear pulsed beneath her calm. She wanted to believe she was ready, but a shadow of doubt lingered. The sound she couldn't hear still haunted her dreams. Could she lead others if she couldn't fully trust her own ears? That evening, she walked to the empty square alone. The air was thick with summer warmth, the sky fading orange to violet. She raised her violin, letting the wind brush past her face. When she played, the sound mixed with the breeze, imperfect, but alive. For the first time, the wind didn't remind her of what she'd lost. It carried what she was becoming. And somewhere between the notes, she felt it. Courage, soft but certain, whispering back through the strings. The town square shimmered with golden light as banners for the summer festival fluttered in the breeze. Children ran through the streets carrying flyers with their group's name printed in bold. Community Ensemble, led by Janet Brooks. The news spread quickly, and soon, excitement filled every corner of the little town. Janet felt both proud and terrified. The festival was no longer a dream, it was a promise she had to keep. Rehearsals stretched late into the evenings, the children's laughter mixed with the soft hum of instruments as fireflies began to glow. Each day, their sound grew stronger, more confident, their rhythm sinking naturally. Janet guided them patiently, using gestures more than words, relying on sight and touch instead of perfect hearing. The music was imperfect, but it carried something deeper, heart. One afternoon, as the group practiced Song of the Wind, Janet noticed a familiar face in the small crowd that gathered to listen. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Maestro Leonard Davis, her former mentor. He watched silently, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The memory of his disapproval from years ago stung like a fresh wound. She turned away quickly, pretending not to see him. After rehearsal, he approached. "Janet Brooks," he said, his voice still sharp as a tuning fork. "You were born for the stage, not the street. What are you doing wasting your gift here?" His words sliced through her calm, dragging old insecurities to the surface. She struggled to find her voice. "I'm teaching," she finally said, steady but quiet. "And they're learning." He shook his head, unimpressed. Leonard's gaze softened for a fleeting moment. "You belong back where the music matters, Janet," he murmured before walking away. His footsteps echoed against the pavement, fading into the evening air. The children approached her nervously, sensing the tension. "Who was that man?" Eli asked. Janet forced a smile. "Someone who doesn't understand this kind of music," she said gently. That night, she couldn't sleep. His words replayed over and over, stirring the doubts she'd buried deep. Was she truly making a difference, or just hiding from the pain of her past? She looked at the violin resting by her bed and whispered, "This is where it matters now." The wind outside sighed, as if agreeing. She decided she would not turn back, not again. The next morning, she arrived at the square early and began tuning every instrument herself. When the children arrived, she greeted them with renewed energy. "Let's make the wind proud," she said, smiling. As the first notes of Song of the Wind filled the air, the melody rose and swirled around them, blending with the morning breeze. Janet closed her eyes. For the first time, she didn't just hear music, she felt it lifting her. The following week brought more visitors, more whispers, and more pressure. People came not only to listen but to see her, the once famous violinist who now taught children in a park. Janet tried to ignore it, focusing on her students' joy instead of the scrutiny. Yet every glance from the crowd reminded her of what she'd lost: the stages, the prestige, the perfection. The ghosts of her past clung like shadows. Leonard returned one evening, this time standing closer, watching every movement of her hands. When rehearsal ended, he approached again, his tone softer. "Janet, these children adore you, but this isn't your world. Come back to New York. I can get you a seat with the Philharmonic again." The words hit her like a storm. For a heartbeat, she imagined it: the lights, the audience, the life she once knew. But then she looked at Eli, who was helping a younger student fix a string with gentle patience. She saw the light in his eyes, the same spark she had when she first touched a violin. That was music too, just in a different form. "I can't," she said finally. "This is where I'm meant to be." Leonard frowned, disbelief etched across his face. "You're wasting your talent, Janet." She smiled sadly. "No, I'm sharing it." He left without another word, leaving the faint scent of his cologne and a heavier silence behind. The children approached her, quietly, as if afraid to speak. Eli looked up at her and asked, "Are we still playing at the festival?" She knelt down, met his eyes, and nodded. "Yes, and we're going to make it beautiful." The fear in her chest melted into resolve. The decision was made. That night, Janet took her violin outside. The sky was wide and black, scattered with stars. She played softly, letting the notes drift into the darkness. Some tones she could hear, others only feel, but all of them belonged to her again. The wind danced through the trees, weaving her music with its own rhythm. For the first time in years, she didn't play for approval. She played for peace. By the end of the song, tears blurred her vision, but her smile stayed. She whispered to the night, "You were wrong, Leonard. The music does matter here." Her voice cracked, but her spirit didn't. Inside her chest, something powerful had settled on understanding that art wasn't about audiences, it was about connection. The wind carried her final note away like a promise. The next morning, she arrived at the square with fresh determination. The children greeted her with laughter, their excitement infectious. They practiced until the sun fell low and the shadows stretched long. When the last note faded, Janet looked at them and thought, maybe this is what healing sounds like. The wind rustled through the oak tree as if to agree. The festival was only 2 weeks away when the sky turned dark and heavy. Clouds rolled over the town, thick and gray, swallowing the horizon. Janet stood in the square, watching as the wind began to twist the banners and scatter the music sheets across the ground. "Let's pack up," she called out, her voice tense. But the storm came faster than her warning could travel. Rain pounded the earth in sheets. The children screamed with laughter and fear as they tried to protect their instruments. Janet ran from stand to stand, helping gather cases and boughs. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking her bones. By the time they reached shelter, everyone was drenched, their instruments soaked. Eli looked at her, trembling. "Are they ruined?" he whispered. Janet couldn't answer. When the rain finally eased, the damage was clear. Strings warped, wood cracked, and the square lay littered with broken stands. Janet's heart sank. This was her responsibility. She should have protected them. Mr. Reyes put a hand on her shoulder, reassuring her. "We'll fix what we can," he said. But she shook her head, eyes stinging with guilt. "They trusted me," she murmured. "I failed them." That night, the storm raged on in her mind long after it left the sky. She lay awake, listening to the wind howl around her house, the same sound that once comforted her. Now it felt like a taunt. She got up, walked to the window, and stared into the darkness. The wind carried faint echoes like distant notes, uneven yet familiar. Something about them felt almost alive, like the earth itself was trying to speak. She opened the window wider, letting the air whip through her hair. The vibrations against her skin were wild and uneven, but she focused, trying to find rhythm within the chaos. Slowly, she began to hum not a song, just a sound to match the wind. The tones wove together, imperfect but strangely beautiful. She closed her eyes, feeling it rather than hearing it. The storm wasn't her enemy anymore. It was teaching her to listen differently. When morning came, she walked to the square and began cleaning alone. Mud clung to her shoes, her hands trembled, but she worked with quiet purpose. One by one, the children arrived to help, carrying rags and small smiles. "We can fix them," Eli said confidently. Janet looked at him and nodded, feeling pride swell in her chest. "Yes," she whispered, "we'll make them sing again." And together, they began. The following days were filled with repair and renewal. The townspeople brought old instruments from their attics, donating whatever they could. Janet showed the children how to replace strings, polish wood, and restore sound with patience. Each repaired violin became a symbol of resilience, proof that broken things could play again. The music they made afterward carried that truth in every note. Janet found herself listening in new ways. She no longer relied solely on her ears but on touch, rhythm, and sight. When Eli played, she could feel his tempo through the floorboards, sense the pulse of the group through the sway of their shoulders. It was as if she had learned an entirely new language of music, one that spoke directly to the heart. Silence was no longer absence. It was depth. One evening, she stood at the edge of the square as the children played. The sound was raw, imperfect, and utterly beautiful. She watched the wind dance through their hair, saw how their laughter carried between the notes. In that moment, she realized that music had always been more about connection than perfection. Every vibration in the air was a reminder that life could sing, even after loss. As twilight deepened, the community gathered again, neighbors, families, strangers drawn by the same invisible force. The square pulsed with life, each song a thread weaving everyone together. Janet felt tears rise as she looked around. This was what she'd been missing all along, not the applause, not the stage lights, but belonging. The sound of togetherness filled the spaces where silence once lived. Eli approached her, holding his violin with care. "You were right," he said softly. "Music doesn't have to be perfect." She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Neither do we." The boy grinned and ran back to his friends, and Janet turned her gaze to the horizon. The wind whispered through the trees like soft applause. She whispered back, "Thank you." When she returned home that night, she opened her window wide and let the night air flow through the room. She lifted her violin and began to play, quietly, letting the notes drift into the dark. She didn't listen for accuracy. She played to feel alive. The melody rose, carried by the wind, until it was no longer hers alone. Somewhere in that song, she found forgiveness for life, for silence, for herself. And as the final note faded, Janet smiled into the stillness. "It's enough," she whispered. The wind answered softly, a gentle hum through the leaves, like the earth agreeing. For the first time, her heart and the silence beat in perfect time. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring music again, and she would be ready to listen. By the time the festival approached, the entire town was buzzing with anticipation. The children's group had grown. New faces joined every week, and the once small ensemble became something remarkable. They named it the Harmony Project, a fitting title for what had become more than just a class. It was a family. Janet, once a shadow of herself, was now its heartbeat. Every rehearsal carried laughter, mistakes, and breakthroughs. The sound was still imperfect, but it no longer mattered. What mattered was that they played together, breathing as one. Janet taught them that every wrong note had a story, and every pause was part of the song. Her joy was contagious, spreading to everyone who came to watch. Even those who couldn't play brought food, chairs, or smiles. Mr. Reyes approached her one evening as the children packed up. "You've done something amazing here," he said, genuine admiration in his tone. "You turned silence into music." Janet chuckled softly. "I just reminded them the wind can carry sound further than fear." He nodded, understanding. For both of them, this project had become something bigger than music. It was proof that healing was possible. One day, as they rehearsed beneath the oak tree, a familiar car pulled up near the square. It was Leonard again, stepping out slowly, his suit out of place amid the dust and laughter. He watched silently, and this time, something in his expression had changed. When the song ended, he clapped just once, but it was enough. He approached Janet with quiet humility. "You were right," he said simply. He handed her an envelope. Inside was an invitation. "The Harmony Project is officially invited to open the summer festival." Janet's eyes widened. "You mean the main stage?" Leonard nodded, smiling faintly. "Yes, the wind has carried your music further than I imagined." Emotion filled her chest, but all she could say was, "Thank you." He left, leaving behind a silence that hummed with promise. The children cheered when she told them. Excitement rippled through the group, followed by a wave of nervousness. "We'll be fine," Janet said, her voice steady. "We'll play from the heart and the wind will do the rest." The words felt true the moment she spoke them. They began practicing harder than ever, each note guided by belief rather than fear. As the final rehearsal ended, Janet stood back and watched them. The wind moved gently through the square, carrying the faint echoes of their laughter and song. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a peace she hadn't known in years. "We're ready," she whispered to herself, and as the breeze brushed against her face, it seemed to whisper back, "Yes, you are." The day the official invitation arrived, Janet stood in her kitchen, staring at the elegant letterhead as if it were a ghost from her past. Opening performance, The Harmony Project, directed by Janet Brooks. The words blurred through her tears. For a moment she felt weightless, suspended between pride and fear. The main stage, the lights, the audience, her heartbeat quickened like the first note before a song begins. Eli burst through her door moments later, breathless and beaming. "We did it, Miss Janet. We're opening the festival." She laughed through her tears, hugging him tightly. "We did it," she repeated. But deep inside, a tremor of doubt lingered. Could she really stand before a crowd again? The thought of silence swallowing her on stage still haunted her dreams. "Courage," she told herself. "Courage is sound, too." That evening, she gathered the group beneath the oak tree to share the news. Cheers erupted, bows waved in the air, and the wind carried their laughter like music. Janet smiled, feeling the joy ripple through her chest. But when she looked toward the empty stage in the distance, she felt its pull of familiar ache, both longing and fear. The past and the present were about to collide. After the excitement faded, she sat with Mr. Reyes, watching the children pack up. "You're nervous," he said gently. She nodded, not denying it. "It's been years since I've faced that kind of silence," she admitted. "The silence that comes right before the first note." He smiled. "Then maybe this time, let the silence play with you, not against you." She nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. The following days were a blur of preparation. The community donated stage lights, chairs, and flowers. Parents sewed matching ribbons for the children's instruments. The town buzzed with pride, as if everyone were part of something bigger than themselves. Janet moved through it all in quiet awe, her heart steadying with each rehearsal. Fear still whispered, but hope sang louder. One night, as she closed the square, she paused to look up at the stars. The wind brushed her face, gentle and cool. "If you're listening," she whispered to the sky, "help me find the sound again, just enough to guide them." The air stirred, rustling the leaves like applause. She smiled faintly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The silence no longer frightened her. It waited patiently, like an old friend. When she returned home, she opened her violin case and began to play. The first notes trembled, uneven but real. She played until the night turned silver with dawn, and when she stopped, she realized something profound. She wasn't trying to hear the sound anymore. She was feeling it, every vibration, every heartbeat, every breath. The wind outside seemed to hum in agreement. The morning of the festival broke with golden lights spilling across the town. Banners waved in the breeze, laughter echoed through the streets, and the scent of blooming magnolias filled the air. Janet dressed slowly, her hands steady despite the storm of emotion inside her. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back, stronger, wiser, quietly radiant. She whispered, "You made it." At the square, the stage gleamed under the rising sun. Children in white shirts and colored ribbons tuned their instruments nervously, their excitement contagious. Eli ran up to Janet, his violin in hand. "Are you scared?" he asked softly. She smiled, kneeling to his level. "A little," she confessed. "But sometimes being scared just means something truly matters." He nodded, gripping her hand tightly. "Then I think we'll play perfectly." As the crowd gathered, murmurs of anticipation filled the air. Janet stood at the front of her group, taking in the sea of faces, friends, strangers, and in the front row, Maestro Leonard Davis. Their eyes met briefly, not with judgment this time, but respect. He nodded once, silently blessing her return to music. The wind picked up, fluttering the pages of their sheet music. It was time. She lifted her bow, and for a heartbeat, the world fell silent. The moment stretched like eternity, the hush before creation. Then, with a single breath, she began. The children followed, their bows rising as one, and song of the wind filled the air. The melody was uneven at first, trembling like wings learning to fly. But soon, the rhythm found them, and the sound became whole. Janet didn't hear every note, but she felt each one vibrate through the wood, the stage, her skin. It was as if the earth itself was playing with them. The audience leaned forward, caught in the raw honesty of their music. There were no perfect tones, no flawless harmony, only truth, woven into sound. The wind swirled through the stage, joining their song like a living spirit. As the final note soared, the crowd rose to its feet. Applause thundered through the air, washing over them like a wave. Janet's chest heaved, her bow still trembling in her hand. She looked at the children, smiling, crying, shining end, felt pride deeper than anything she had known before. They had done it. Together, they had turned silence into symphony. Janet bowed deeply, tears streaming down her face. In the front row, Leonard stood, clapping with a rare smile. Behind him, the whole town shouted her name. She turned her face toward the wind and whispered, "You carried us." The breeze brushed her cheek in reply, and for one breathtaking second, she thought she heard it whisper back, "You were listening." The applause still echoed in her mind long after the festival ended. That night, the town held a celebration in the square, lights strung between the trees like captured stars. Laughter, music, and joy filled every corner. Janet stood near the oak tree, watching her students dance with their families. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Every sound, every laugh, every note felt sacred. Leonard approached her with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "You've changed the way I think about music," he said simply. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, Leonard, the wind did that." He smiled, understanding the truth beneath her words. "Maybe, but you listened to it." Their eyes met, and for once, there was no regret between them, only respect and closure. When the crowd called her to the stage for one final bow, she hesitated, but Eli grabbed her hand and pulled her forward. "They're cheering for you, Miss Janet," he said with excitement. She smiled, stepping up as the lights bathed her in gold. The applause grew louder, echoing into the night sky. She looked out over the sea of faces, overwhelmed by gratitude. For years, she had chased perfection. Now she was simply grateful to be heard. She raised her violin one last time and played a short melody, soft, wordless thank you. The sound drifted through the air, tender and imperfect, yet it silenced the crowd. When she finished, people wept openly. It wasn't about the music anymore. It was about everything the music had carried: hope, loss, love, and the strength to begin again. Even silence applauded that night. Afterward, Leonard placed a hand on her shoulder. "There's something more you need to do," he said quietly. "Teach them all, every child who needs to find their sound again." Janet nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes," she said, "I think the wind already told me that." He smiled, leaving her to the soft glow of lanterns swaying in the breeze. When the crowd finally dispersed, Janet stayed behind, sitting on the stage beneath the stars. The air was calm, filled with faint traces of laughter fading into distance. She lifted her face to the sky and whispered, "Thank you." For once, she didn't expect an answer, but the wind sighed gently through the trees, brushing her cheek, and that was enough. The night hummed with peace. She walked home beneath the moonlight, carrying her violin close. The silence was no longer an emptiness. To feel it was a companion, breathing beside her. For the first time in forever, Janet didn't dread tomorrow. Tomorrow, she would begin again, not as a performer, but as a teacher, a healer, and a friend of the wind. Weeks later, the old community center on Maple Street reopened under a new name, the Harmony Center. Janet stood at its entrance, ribbon in hand, surrounded by her students and townspeople. "This place," she said, her voice trembling, "belongs to all of us. It's where broken instruments and broken hearts learned to sing again." With one cut, the ribbon fell, and cheers erupted through the air. Inside, the rooms glowed with life. Instruments hung on the walls like art, each one repaired and waiting for new hands. The laughter of children filled the halls as they ran between lessons, their energy contagious. Janet moved among them with quiet joy, helping tune violins, guiding small fingers, teaching them to listen not just with their ears, but with their hearts. The building pulsed with music and meaning. Eli, now confident and radiant, had become her assistant. "Miss Janet," he said one afternoon, "I think the wind is always listening to us." She smiled, adjusting his bow. "Maybe it's playing along," she replied. The boy grinned. "Then we should play louder." Their laughter joined the hum of practice, rising through the open windows into the sky. Outside, the oak tree swayed like it was keeping time. As months passed, people from neighboring towns began visiting to learn, to listen, to heal. The Harmony Center became a sanctuary for anyone who had lost their song. Janet's story spread quietly, inspiring others who had thought their silence was permanent. She never sought attention. She only wanted to share what the wind had taught her, that beauty was not about perfection, but presence. One quiet evening, after everyone had gone, Janet sat alone in the classroom. The golden sunset painted the walls, and the air smelled of pine and resin. She lifted her violin and played Song of the Wind slowly, savoring each note. It didn't matter that her hearing wasn't whole. the vibrations through her body, the movement of air around her. Those were her music now. She smiled as she played, feeling utterly complete. When the final note faded, she looked around the empty room and whispered, "You did good, Janet." It wasn't pride, it was peace. Outside, the wind rustled softly, slipping through the open door, as if to join her. The leaves outside danced to the rhythm of her heartbeat, and in that moment, everything, the silence, the wind, the music was one. That night, she closed the center and stepped into the cool air. The stars shimmered above, and the distant laughter of children echoed faintly. Janet took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of life itself. "Thank you," she whispered once more to the sky. The wind answered, warm and soft against her cheek, like an embrace that said, "You're home." Years passed, but the music never stopped. The town grew, the children became adults, and the Harmony Center flourished. New generations came, each one learning to listen, not just to notes, but to life. Janet, her hair now streaked with silver, still walked the halls every morning, carrying her violin with quiet pride. Her steps were slower, her smile softer, but her spirit had only grown louder. One afternoon, she returned to the old oak tree where it all began. Children were playing beneath it, their laughter rising like birdsong. A young girl approached her shyly, holding a small violin. "Miss Janet," she said, "will you play with us?" Janet hesitated for a moment, then smiled warmly. Of course, she took her place beside them, lifting her bow as the wind stirred the branches overhead. When she played, the sound was delicate but strong, a perfect reflection of her journey. She didn't need to hear it to know it was beautiful. The children followed her lead, their bows moving in harmony, their eyes bright with wonder. The melody of Song of the Wind rose once again, drifting beyond the square, beyond the town, into the endless sky. The wind carried it farther than any stage ever could. As they finished, the children cheered, hugging her with joy. Janet laughed, her heart overflowing. She looked around at their faces, the future of music, of hope, of courage, and felt tears of pure gratitude. "You did it," she whispered to them. "You've learned to listen." And they had, not just to sound, but to love, to silence, to the whispers of the world itself. When everyone left, Janet remained beneath the tree, her violin resting on her lap. The afternoon sun painted the sky with gold, and the breeze played gently with her hair. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The wind hummed softly around her, the same song that had once saved her. "You never left," she murmured, smiling. "You were always singing." The wind answered with a tender gust, carrying a single note from her strings into the horizon. Janet listened up with her ears, but with her heart hand felt peace settle within her. The note faded into silence, but the silence itself sang back, warm and alive. She opened her eyes, and the world glowed. And as the final rays of light fell across her face, Janet whispered, "Not every sound is meant to be heard. Some are meant to be felt." The wind wrapped around her one last time, carrying her song through the sky, where it would never truly end.